Not that long ago, Theo Von was a blue chip, unknown comedian. Now, he's one of the most recognizable faces in the game.
With Theo, it's like he's the LeBron James of comedy, so creative. I'm just that shitty coach on the side trying to manage.
We all know a huge part of his success is down to Joe Rogan, but he's recently hit a new level of stardom, and weirdly enough, it can all be tied to the UFC. Whether it's getting involved in the sport, interviewing fighters on his podcast, or capitalizing on the UFC's inclusion of political figures, Theo seems to be intertwined with MMA. Now, there's even a conspiracy theory saying Theo Von is secretly employed by Dana White and the UFC. So this is the story of how the UFC has led to the rise of Theo Von. Before fame, I think most MMA fans, strangely enough, know the rough version of Theo Von's upbringing. He grew up in a working-class environment in Louisiana, went to a normal school, and struggled with many things young kids do. But one thing that was totally unique was his family dynamic, particularly with his father.
I mean, my dad was real old when I was born.
How old was he when you were born?
My dad was 70 when I was born.
He was 70 when you were born.
So I had this weird perspective, I think, of things, and this real self-defeating, like, life didn't want me or God doesn't want, like, I'm barely here.
His true name, which isn't actually Theo Von, comes from his half-Polish, half-Nicaraguan background, left him often feeling like an outsider. And at 14 years old, it led to him making a life-changing decision to go on his own.
Went to high school, and then I got emancipated when I was 14. I just had a tough time growing up with my mom, and she was just hectic. My mom
What do you mean
delivered.
emancipated? Like you're on your own?
Yeah.
And then where did you go?
And then I went to live with friends. I would take a backpack to school every day, and I would stay with whoever let me stay, man. And I made a lot of good friends that way, and families, because you literally come into a family immediately, and you're like part of the family as long as the parents will let you stay there,
Yeah.
At that time, he never even had a permanent home until one family gave him something he never had to himself, a bedroom.
And then I got a family that let me come stay with them for literally about 3 or 4 years. So that was really cool. I had my own room for the first time. Yeah, I mean, we had, so there was some change there. It's funny, I never really thought about a lot of this.
But comedy and humor became his safety net. It led him to getting a gig on an MTV reality show called Road Rules, where the producer of the show saw a lot of potential in Theo.
One of the producers after the show, so next thing you know, I'll go around the whole country with this Road Rules thing. One of the producers after the show, whose birthday was yesterday, actually, I emailed him and told him happy birthday, Bruce Toms. He said to me, he goes, I think you should move to Los Angeles. I think you could be an actor.
And much like many aspiring comedians, the bright lights of California and Los Angeles called. So Theo packed up his belongings, headed west, and left Louisiana behind. Through that classic hustle of sleeping in the car, couch surfing, and barely making ends meet, Theo met one Joe Rogan. And eventually that connection would be the catalyst for Theo Von to become a superstar in the comedy world and then the UFC sphere. It was February 2017, episode 925 of the JRE podcast, where Theo Von first appeared, and after that, he became a pretty frequent guest. Sure, he was already having a lot of personal success at this point, but becoming a frequent guest on Rogan's podcast opened a whole new world for him, because at some point, in almost every MMA fan's life, they've been an avid watcher of the JRE podcast. And there's this odd crossover between Rogan's comedian friends and UFC fans. There's the direct links like Brendan Schaub as a former fighter, or Eddie Bravo as a former UFC employee and BJJ icon. But then there's less obvious connections. Joey Diaz had a karate persona where he'd talk about UFC fights. Then the likes of Brian Callen, Tom Segura, and Bert Kreischer all have wild stories with fighters.
I think I could beat up Stylebender. If we were drinking, we had to drink the same amount of beers and then get in the cage. We each had to drink 12 beers and get in the cage. And it was a joke. It was a joke. I was around with Tommy. I never thought I'd meet Stylebender. First of all, he's way bigger than you think. He's way bigger than you think. Okay, and his hands are huge and they're soft. And the first thing he does, Joe, is he grabs my arm to dap me up, and he throws a knee, and he grabs me by the back of the neck and goes, "You still think you could f me up?" And I'm like, I'm so sorry.
Then David Goggins training fighters or being a cornerman, Cam Hanes being friends with Colby Covington. It's pretty simple. MMA fans watch the podcast. They become familiar with the personalities and eventually fans of them too. And that's where Theo Von ended up. Although he leaned into the UFC aspect of things even more than the rest. He actually started posting his own fight breakdowns all the way back in 2018.
This is the 4th fight I ever watched, maybe, or 5th fight. But they try to pull each other's pants down at the body ceremony. Because in the beginning, you know, if you're new to MMA kickboxing, there is a body ceremony where they meet up and look at each other's bodies and do the scale and everything. And Mike Perry tried to pull down the other man's pants. And I thought it was funny. You know, I watched it.
But it wasn't so popular just because Theo is a funny guy. It's because it was like watching your friend get into MMA and experience how incredible the sport is for the very first time through him.
I mean, when you're watching Mike Perry fight, man, it's almost like he's fighting in a hallway, if that makes any sense. It's like he's just in this one zone. Where Max Griffin, it's a little bit more like, you know, like the lens, like he's fighting with more of a panoramic lens, like he's, you know, a little bit wider. You know, like he's kind of seeing everything.
He had that curious mindset about the sport, appreciated its difficulty, and respected those more knowledgeable than him. And with the help of Rogan and co., even started dabbling in BJJ himself.
And you make friends, you start to realize people got your back, you're not fucking alone. There's nothing is as helpful, I don't think, as going to those jiu-jitsu classes. I don't go into them as much as I wish I did, because I kept getting hurt, bro. And I couldn't do anything. I had to work. I'm fucking wheezed, and I got my shit all wrapped up. I got a fucking bunch of lemons and duct tape to my rib cage and reading shit online, you know, eating oleander or whatever on the fucking internet and apple seeds.
But his link to the sport really stepped up later in 2018 when he became friends with his fellow Louisiana native, Dustin Poirier.
Yeah, I've met so many neat people and have been inspired by so many people from your sport. Dustin Poirier and I are close friends, you know, and it's been special. Like, he's like a real friend to me. He's inspired me so many times when I want to give up. I remember things that he says or other fighters say. It's interesting the amount of inspiration that a lot of people get from your sport.
And through that home state bond, the two became unlikely but genuine friends. So much so that Theo has been to Poirier's after parties, he celebrates his victories, and Dustin is a frequent guest on his own podcast. And you'll always see his tweets shown on the live UFC broadcast, although it doesn't always go to plan.
But I was smoking weed one time and I was watching like UFC Fight Pass. I didn't realize that it wasn't. I thought it was live, right? So I started tweeting about some fucking fight, right? Bro, tweeting like I'm in 3 rounds in.
Wow, what a banger.
Bro, I'm hashtagging UFC like UFC 160.
No doubt Theo is doing it all for his own exploration and enjoyment of the sport, but a welcome byproduct is opening his brand to a whole new audience. Now, he frequently has the biggest names in MMA as guests on his show. There's even an argument that his podcast has surpassed Joe Rogan's, not in terms of legacy, but quality and even viewership from episode to episode. But Theo's podcast has now moved into the same sphere that many critique the UFC for, putting politics and politicians front and center. We know the UFC has recently started propping politicians and these cultural figures at the live events, whether it's Trump getting a walkout like he's an actual fighter, Elon Musk sitting next to Dana, or Zuckerberg being a cornerman.
We're going to have a UFC fight. We're going to have a UFC fight. Think of this, on the grounds of the White House. We have a lot of land there. We're going to build a little, we're not, Dana's going to do it. Dana's great, one of a kind. We're going to have a UFC fight, championship fight, full fight, like 20, 25,000 people. And we're going to do that as part of 250 also. We're going to have some incredible events, some professional events, some amateur events, but the UFC fight's going to be a big deal too. And
previously, the UFC would just highlight music stars, athletes, actors, and similar celebrities at their shows. But nowadays, the focus has heavily shifted towards people with great political influence, and it more than often tends to be right-wing leaning.
The Trump MAGA crowd has completely taken over Ultimate Fighting. Dana White, who's the owner of UFC, loves Trump. And over the weekend at a UFC event in New York's Madison Square Garden, Donald Trump was welcomed with a full-on Trump propaganda reel that played on the Jumbotron. One of the fighters, John Jones, praised Trump during his victory speech and handed Trump his belt.
It's become the recent identity for the company itself to be right-leaning, while almost every other sport doesn't have a clear political position. And while we're not assuming Theo Von's political beliefs in any way because he talks to politicians with varying viewpoints, he often has these very same people on his podcast, from JD Vance, Trump himself, RFK Jr., and others, and perhaps unsurprisingly, there are many of his most viewed podcasts of all time, reaching new numerous millions of people, and in particular, it was the RFK episode that ended up with Theo, a well-known sponsor, and the UFC itself at each other's throats. Because of RFK's beliefs, his ability to cause controversy and association with right-wing politics, the fitness cycling company Peloton, a regular sponsor of the podcast, called Theo Von with some wild demands.
We had Robert Kennedy Jr. on, and we had a couple companies call after that and say, yeah, just stuff about him. We're not advertising on this episode. My advertiser's like, you guys need to take the episode down.
And it just so turns out that the UFC Gym and Performance Institute is home to numerous Peloton bikes. In a later episode with Theo and Dana White, the comedian told the UFC president about the situation. Of course, you can imagine Dana's reaction.
Peloton sells stationary bikes, and they got a problem with Robert Kennedy. You, Peloton. Who the fuck are they?
Yeah, first of
right?
all,
Are you fucking kidding me?
Yeah.
Fucking Peloton bitching about Robert Kennedy.
Yeah, dude, you want to go nowhere?
Who's the CEO of Peloton? I want to see this.
Yeah, I want to see this fucking lamb, dude. Hey, you know what gets you further than a Peloton? Hitchhiking.
In response, the UFC quite literally threw every Peloton bike they had in the trash. For reference, they're over $2,000 a bike, all because he believes in free speech, doing what you want, and speaking to whoever you want, which ironically is a very liberal viewpoint, while Peloton's is the total opposite. Dana went on to verbally destroy Peloton, insult its CEO, and sided with Theo Von.
Let's see Barry McCarthy.
Oh my God.
Oh yeah. Oh, fucking yeah. Barry McCarthy looks like that guy. 100%.
Look, if you're just listening at home and you're thinking of what he looks like, you're right.
He looks like a douchebag.
Not that this was the sole reason why, but the Peloton CEO stepped down in mid-2024 after their stock plummeted, even more layoffs occurred, and their business model completely failed.
Right there tells you exactly what Barry McCarthy is all about. Peloton just laid off 500 of their employees in their 4th round of cuts this year.
Yep.
You know what, everybody listening? Barry McCarthy and Peloton.
It just goes to show how highly Dana White and UFC regard Theo Von, because in recent years, Theo Von has become a bit of a hardcore MMA fan who's now synonymous with the sport. He's even backstage with Dustin Poirier after the lowest moments of his career.
I remember sitting in your green room after we were all sitting in there.
Oh, yeah,
and literally, it was like, it felt like we were at a funeral in a weird way.
Yeah.
But you were right there.
Yeah.
It just felt like everybody felt.
I told everybody that in there. I said, "Hey, this ain't a funeral."
You're like,
yeah.
You're going around trying to boost people's spirits. You're like, hey, I'm
You put on a black suit and stuff.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Yeah. I don't even know where you got it.
We're all singing, I can still hear Mama praying.
Somebody stood up and was like, he was a good man. I'm like, I'm right here, bro.
You often see Theo front and center from the very first fight of the evening, while the arena, and particularly the floor seats, are completely empty. He's popping up on buses with Conor McGregor and the Paul brothers.
Hands on Pam. Yo, that's crazy. That's my mom.
Couple best friends?
That's how we do it.
Theo seems so intertwined with the sport nowadays that some MMA fans out there have a conspiracy theory that he's secretly been hired by the UFC. They believe he has a partnership with the company where they'll give him free seats, access to Dana White, the fighters, and both parties benefit. Theo gets a bunch of great guests and access to a new audience, while the UFC gets free marketing, and Theo's fans will end up crossing over the UFC. And while it's all but certainly just a conspiracy theory and nothing more, that's how close Theo Von is tied to the UFC in 2025. Even if there isn't a paper contract with this partnership, there's definitely an unspoken one, where both parties are helping each other. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, please go and subscribe. We're super close to hitting 50,000 subscribers, which is absolutely wild, and we'd massively appreciate it if you help us hit that milestone.